So by you as a qualified candidate going to a hiring manager, making that good impression and saying, hey, listen, I'm interested in a role that sounds similar to the role that you're hiring for, would love to connect. That's really the best way to get an interview. And that's how what we talk about getting an interview without applying online.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Data Scientist Show. Today we have Jerry Lee. Jerry is the COO and founder of Wonsulting and previously Senior Strategy and Operations Manager at Google. He used to lead product strategy at Lucid. After graduating from Babson College, Jerry was hired as the youngest analyst in his organization by being promoted multiple times in 2 years to his current position in Google. With Wonsulting, Jerry partners with universities and organizations to help others land into their dream careers. He's amassed 250,000 followers across LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, and has reached 40 million professionals. In addition, his work has been featured on Forbes, Newsweek, Business Insider, Yahoo News, LinkedIn, and he was elected as 2020 LinkedIn Top Voice for Tag.
Yeah. Hey, you did a better job of introducing myself than I do myself. So.
Yeah, I feel like I did a rap.
Yeah.
Amazing career, Jerry. So you graduated from a non-targeted university, and
That's right.
You are the first one in your university to ever get into Google. Can you tell us why it's hard for students from non-targeted school to get into companies like Google, and how did you do it?
Yeah. Honestly, well, first, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Daliana, for having me. I am so privileged and honored to be here. So a little bit about my story of how I became the first intern at Google from my school. So I remember going through college and feeling like, man, I am not good enough to work at these top companies. I remember I had a couple of my friends who were in my hall actually in freshman year. One of them was screaming down the hall, running down. I was like, oh my gosh, I just got an internship. And in my mind, I was like, what's an internship? You know? And she was like, yeah, I'm going to work at McKinsey & Company. I'm like, cool, I've never heard of it before. And then another week later, another one of my other friends said, oh my gosh, I want to work at Goldman Sachs. I'm like, cool, I've never heard of it. Later that I find out that those are like the biggest like in their respective industries. And that made me realize, my gosh, like I am so far behind. Like I have no family who work in corporate America, and I also have no idea what a resume is, and I just learned about what an internship is, so I was like, I gotta figure this out. But I think if there's two things that I feel like have contributed to me getting into Google from starting from a place of nothing during my freshman year would be that every semester when I was in college, I interned somewhere. So sophomore year, second semester, I interned at a consulting firm. Then I interned at Dell EMC. Then I interned at 3 other places before I actually got my Google offer. And the second thing that I think really helped was that in addition to having the basics of a good GPA and having internship experience, I also had a lot of leadership experience. So you sort of have this random guy who has had 6 internships before he's applied to his junior year internship. And also he's involved with 4 other clubs and also has a high GPA. Those 3 things, I think, in conjunction with each other, it just made it seem like I was an overachiever, even though I really wasn't.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And I just pressed the apply button, and somehow, some way, they reached out.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Yeah. And you started your career in business intelligence and data analytics.
That's right.
Yeah. So what is something you learned about data analytics in that job that you didn't learn in school?
Man, I always thought that being a good analyst or being a data scientist meant that I had to learn R really well, or I had to learn how to use Excel really well, or I had to learn how to do SQL. But the more I learned about analytics, the more I began to realize crunching numbers, that's the easy part. But it's taking those numbers and being able to say, okay, the numbers tell us this, so we as a business should be making these decisions.
Right.
That to me, I didn't feel like was as important. I always thought of me being like the Excel monkey or like the data monkey and being like, that's what a good analyst is. I think is really the latter that I've learned has been really important.
Yeah. So for people who don't have those type of experience, how can I hone those type of skill sets?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to two pieces, two parts. One is learning the actual skill. So if you want to be really good at Excel, do Excel. But the second thing is finding experience. Now, whether or not you want to do this in a full-time role, whether you want to do this at an internship, or even if you want to do this for a club organization, or if you're not in school, then reaching out to local businesses and saying, hey, I want to help unlock business insights for you for free. Let me do that using my Excel, R, SQL skills, what have you. Probably not SQL because they'll need a database, but that typically, in my mind, is how you take from nothing, learn the skill, and actually apply it so that then you can go to recruiters and say, hey, I've already done this kind of work.
Yeah. That's a great advice. And even if you want to be a data analyst, you can still use a lot of public data set, for example, like Kaggle. It doesn't always have to be used for machine learning purposes. You can download the data and do some exploratory analysis with it, do some data visualization, put it on GitHub, put it on your Medium post. That's a great project, and see what kind of insights you can draw from it.
I love that. And I think the emphasis here is that you don't have to be in an organization. You don't have to work at Google to get experience. You can get experience anywhere. And as long as you can translate that into your resume, you're golden.
Yeah, that's great advice. And so you started in data analytics, but later on you become a senior strategy and operations manager at Google. So how did your data science and that experience help you get a job?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing in a strategy so let me give you all a little background of what my strategy and operations experience is like. So we were a small team and we supported a business unit, and we worked with the executives to figure out what are some of the big business questions we should be thinking about, what are the competitors doing, and how should that then influence what we do as a business from a sales, marketing, product side. So really my foundation in analytics forced me to be extremely quick with crunching numbers, extremely quick of asking, well, how do we know that this assumption is something that we have to believe? Do we have any data to support that? And it allowed me to be extremely hypothesis driven.
Yeah.
I think in these type of roles, especially when you work with executives, they might ask you a really ambiguous question, but it's up to you to say, let me break it up in smaller chunks. These are the hypotheses or sort of assertions that we can create.
Yep.
Let me validate or disprove with data, and then be able to say, we shouldn't do this, or we should do this, or maybe we're thinking about this wrong. And so for me, numbers has been everything in my career, and is I feel like has really allowed me to really accelerate my career.
Yeah, I think that becomes a superpower once you have the experience, especially you're very good at those tools to pull your own data, doing your own analysis, and combine with your business mindset, you can be you can be very successful in the business role.
That's right. And when I was leading a product strategy team at a mid-sized tech company, when we interviewed product managers, we actually gave them an analytics interview.
Wow.
So analytics is not something that only data analysts use or consultants use. It's really used everywhere.
Yeah. I'm curious, can you give us some example of what type of analytics question you ask for product managers?
Yeah. So it really depends on the role, because some product managers might have a team of analysts being supported. At a smaller company, you might have to be the 10% analyst.
Yeah.
But in those cases, typically you'll get sort of two types of interviews. One is sort of like can you do the analytics? So it either will be SQL based or it'll either be an Excel based, and they'll give you a bunch of data to say, hey, write out these queries or tell us what insights you'd sort of take from it. The second part of it, which I think is a more important part, is that the interviews that I've seen is they'll give you data, have you crunch it, but more importantly, either put together a presentation or they'll ask you a number of business questions to say, what does this data tell us? And again, for product managers and for roles that aren't analytics focused, it's not going to be super deep. It's probably going to be pretty high level, but that's the level of, I guess, importance of analytics plays in so many roles.
Yeah. And a lot of times when we make business decisions, even for data science, we don't have enough data or the data quality is bad. So when those situations happens, how do you make decisions?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because within Wonsulting, we have access to data from a million different places, and we have to make a decision based on the sort of mummified version of like all these data sources. So the way that we sort of think about it is we make sure that we are extremely hypothesis driven and are okay with the 80-20 principle. The 80-20 principle, for those people who aren't familiar, is that you can pretty much get 80% of the results with 20% of the input. So for us, we really think about what is a like true question or hypothesis that we're trying to test. Are there quantitative data points that we can pull? If not, then let's look at qualitative. Maybe we can do surveys, maybe we can do focus groups, interviews, things like that. So that's the way that we've sort of approached it. I'd be curious to hear from you.
Yeah, I was so surprised. You said a lot of very similar things that what we did when we don't have enough data. If you don't have those big data, we call it some small data, is just as powerful. You can do focus group, ask 30 people questions, and if you see some very similar pain points, a lot of times I wouldn't draw a causal inference here, but we are not that special. If someone find it painful, probably there are going to be a lot of people find it painful. So we can actually learn a lot from those small group studies. And there's some other approach. For example, maybe you can use Bayesian analysis, look at what it was like the before, and then construct some other methodology together. The downside of this, you make a lot of assumptions. So when you don't have enough data, you need to look for data outside. Sometimes you can use some public data, but just know that the data have to be similar enough to solve your current problem. And if not, just make a note, okay, this is assumption we make, and then come back to it.
That's right, yeah. And one of the things that I've learned is at Google, we've been making business decisions that might move hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. So therefore, we had to make sure our analyses were bulletproof, that we answered every little question, figured out every single nuance. But also there were a lot of business questions that we answered that didn't have as big of an impact. And we sort of said, you know what, like, we don't need to go so in depth with those analyses because it's better for us to make action first, learn from it. The risk is minimal. So therefore we're okay being action first in that way. So finding that right balance between when is it time for me to do a statistical modeling exercise versus doing a quick and dirty analysis, for me is something that I am still learning today. You know?
Yeah, this is so important. I'm glad you brought it up. Sometimes we don't really need to have 99% of accuracy or 90% of confidence in the results. With calculated risk, maybe you should just take actions when you feel 70% comfortable of your results. And then while you are iterating on it, you're learning it, you're also getting more data points to give feedback to your current approach. So when we develop models in the real world, always factoring the time, the longer you take, you might miss opportunity to help the business make more money.
That's right, yeah.
So you mentioned you sometimes help make the decisions that can impact like millions of dollars. How do you make sure those decisions are correct?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Yeah. If we can make 100% the correct decisions, I'd be a trillionaire. But I think the biggest thing that we've learned, or the biggest thing I've learned in my career, is that you just want to make sure you think and tackle problems in a very structured way. I think prior to me having these experiences, I sort of always made decisions based on gut. We're saying, hey, I think this sounds right. Let me if I can find a number to support that, I must be right.
Yeah, it feels good.
It feels good. Right? And so the more I sort of spent time developing myself in my strategy and operations role, the more I began to realize it is so important for you to be able to take a problem, break it down into 3 pieces, making sure that you're covering all bases, keep cutting it down up until you have a certain number of assertions. You find data to support or disprove those assertions. You bring it back up for you to be able to say yes or no. So I think the longer I've been working, the more I began to realize analysis and business insights, creating recommendations is less so about jumping straight to the numbers,
Yeah.
but it's about thinking about a plan of attack. Being able to say, these are 3 sub-hypotheses we want to prove. Let's now find data for us to prove or disprove those hypotheses.
Oh my God, I made so many mistakes just because I always felt so excited. Okay, I have the data. I want to use the newest model I learned and then solve it. But a lot of times it's more important to take a step back, ask the question, what is the goal of the business? Like you mentioned, what are the assumptions? What are the priorities? Because you can always spend unlimited time to refine the solution. I think sometimes writing it down is very helpful. Translate the business question into a data science question and also put them back in words with a narrative and then dive into the data.
Yeah, and Harvard Business Review has this article, I think it was released in the 90s, where it says it's something along the lines of answer first work planning. And the whole idea behind that is saying, instead of just saying, there's a business question, now let me just look at numbers, it's rather you want to tackle things with hypotheses first, rather than just jumping straight into the numbers, because I'm sure that we all know the more time you spend looking at numbers, the more questions you sort of begin to have.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a very specific direction, then you're going to be left more confused than having clarity, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So you worked in data and then you transitioned into this business role. And I think probably a lot of people watching this, they also have this similar interests. They love data, but they also like business.
Yeah.
And they don't know, should I start my career in analytics, data science, or go into business directly? What's your advice for them?
I think if there's one thing that I've learned about long-term planning in your career, is that it is always a moving target. I remember when I first graduated college, I was like, all right, I'm gonna go 2 years in consulting, 2 years at business school, and then I'm gonna work at tech.
Yeah.
Look at me now, I did none of that. So for me, I sort of stumbled upon my first role at Google because I felt like data is only gonna become more important for us in this world. Therefore, we're gonna need people like me to help, like all of us, to help consume and make sense out of this. So that's why I took an analytics first approach. But I also have a number of colleagues who sort of went into the business side first, did consulting, then came into Google into more technical roles. I don't think that there truly is a right answer. I think the biggest thing that you can do for your career is to make sure that you're in a role that actually excites you. And at which point, when you no longer become excited, or where you feel like, man, this role, I don't know why I wake up in the morning to do this, that's when maybe it's time to look elsewhere. So I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer. I do think that it's best for people to just dive in, and as soon as you feel like you've hit a wall in your growth, that's the time to move on.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. So basically you're saying it doesn't matter where you want to start. If you feel you're so curious about the data, just dive in and learn. You can always transition to business or vice versa.
That's right. And I think there's a misconception in most people feeling like, oh, well, if I start my role in here, I'm going to be stuck there.
Yeah.
I think people typically don't think about their career switches enough, and they don't plan for it enough. Mm-hmm. But if you took some time to think about, cool, well, step 1 for me is I want to build my analytical skills. Step 2 then is going to be me for jumping into a business role. As long as you can sort of think about what the next step looks like, you can sort of claw away at it, network one person every 3 weeks until you're sort of finally ready to make that jump. And if you take those small actions for you to plan for your next career step, it becomes significantly easier.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to ask you more about networking later. Yeah. But before that, since we're talking about your work at Google, what is it like to work at Google?
Slides, you just eat food every day, and that's it.
Wow.
Working at Google is a really interesting question, because I feel like with a movie made after the culture at Google, with a lot of documentaries and a lot of articles sort of talking about the food, the slides, the gym, people get this idea that maybe you don't work at all. Maybe you just have fun all day.
Yeah.
But I think when you strip everything away, you realize that it's just a job, just like any other job. Yes, they have perks to make the time at work and make your life a little bit easier. But I'd say the culture of Google is significantly dependent on each team. That one team, you could have a team that's very chill, doesn't really do much, works 30, 40 hours a week. But another team you might have working 80-hour weeks and they're just grinding you.
Yeah.
I feel like in bigger companies might have overarching themes of culture, but the true day-to-day culture really comes down from the team.
Yeah. And also the project cycle.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Is it similar for Amazon as well?
Yeah, I think it's probably similar to every company. And people always ask me, what is it like working at Amazon? It really depends on the team and the job roles.
That's right.
And time of the year.
That's right.
So if we want to network to find out what is the role like specifically on that team, make sure you ask the person that works in that organization. It's not like everybody in general can give an answer.
Yeah.
And then you see a lot of opinions online from Glassdoor. Those voices might be biased. If you really want to get a good perspective, ask the most relevant person.
Exactly, yeah. And as I sort of think about apps like Blind, Fishbowl, Glassdoor, you definitely have a very small vocal minority there because they're the people who are so inclined to talk about their experiences at that company. It can either be amazing or it could either be really poor.
Yeah.
So really finding that middle ground. Absolutely agree.
Yeah. So we talk about networking, and I know you have over 130K followers, grown super fast. I don't know how many today.
I think I'm almost at 150 now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So and you also write a lot about how do you get jobs through networking on LinkedIn.
Yes.
What are some tips for people that they can get interviews by sending cold messages or network on LinkedIn?
That's right. So we call this the 4 tiers of applying to jobs. And people generally, when I ask them, how do you apply to a job? They think I'm stupid because they go, Jerry, what do you mean? I just click apply online. Applying to jobs is significantly more than that. So when we sort of think about the 4 tiers, we think about tier 1 being the most effective and tier 4 being the least effective. If we start with tier 4, we're talking about simply clicking apply online. That's it. Studies have shown roughly anywhere from about 0.5 to 2% chance of getting an interview. Now, the step higher than that is what we call an internal referral, where if I were still at Google and you as a listener said, hey, Jerry, I want to work at Google, I'll say, cool. I would hand you a referral. You submit your resume internally with my referral. That, depending on the company size, it can either be that you're guaranteed a recruiter screen, or it could just mean that a recruiter is going to look at your resume. That's it. But you still have to go through the hiring manager to determine whether or not you actually want to move forward in the process. So that leaves the top 2. If an internal referral and just applying to jobs online aren't the best strategies, then what is the best strategy? Is what we call tier 1 is hiring manager recommendation, and tier 2 is what we call hiring team member recommendation. And a hiring manager recommendation is exactly as it sounds. If you can find the right hiring manager and you can make a good impression on that hiring manager, then that hiring manager might go, hey, I have an open spot on my team. I feel like you might be good for that spot. Because as hiring managers, you do not want empty spots on your team. Like, you want to hire as quickly as possible and spend the least amount of time on hiring, because hiring is a pain in the butt. You're interviewing so many candidates, and after each interview, I remember when I was at Google, we would have to put 30 to 45 minutes worth of feedback.
Wow.
You'd have to go so in depth. So it takes up so much of your time, and your work does not go down. So if anything, you just want to make sure that's done. So by you as a qualified candidate going to a hiring manager, making that good impression and saying, hey, listen, I'm interested in a role that sounds similar to the role that you're hiring for, would love to connect. That's really the best way to get an interview. And that's how what we talk about getting an interview without applying online. And a hiring team member is the same concept, except it's someone on the hiring team tells the hiring manager, hey, listen, Daliana, gotta hire her.
Okay, so now I'm curious, how do you get a hiring manager that you don't know to think about you when they're looking for some candidates?
That's right. That's a really good question. So the underlying assumption that I think most people have when they cold connect is that they believe that they have no value and actually that they're asking a favor from a stranger. But if you think about it, if you're reaching out to the right hiring managers and you're not reaching out to every hiring manager out there in the world, then you're actually doing them a favor if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because the favor that you're delivering them is that you're bringing yourself as a qualified candidate to the hiring manager. You're saying, hey, listen, I'm here. I'm thinking about applying to your role. With your insight, I might consider applying. I think most job seekers today feel that they have limited value to bring to the table, and they always feel like the power of negotiation is always on the hiring side. I don't believe that. I truly believe that employees themselves, if they truly had the opportunity to lead a team and had to hire a team from scratch, you will begin to understand how hard it is to find quality candidates. The more that you could put yourself out there, reaching out to hiring managers, getting on calls with them, the higher chances you'll have of one hiring manager just saying, Daliana, I would love for you to interview for my team.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, then the recruiter screen is going to be a breeze, because a recruiter screen is trying to figure out, are you someone that I could pass to the hiring manager and feel confident? But if you already have the hiring manager's recommendation, then you've already skipped step one.
Yeah. And I think it's so powerful to your point that you just overcome the fear. No, you're providing value to the hiring manager, and nobody is going to ever hire you if you don't reach out, send a message. Now, I have the courage to send a message. What should I say?
Yeah. So if you ask any recruiter, the biggest qualm they have about people reaching out are two things. One, that they're reaching out to the wrong recruiter. So for example, if I'm going for a data science role and I'd reach out to a recruiter, but this recruiter actually hires for marketing roles or G&A roles, I, as the recruiter, I'm going to be annoyed because I'm like, man, you didn't take a look at my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So the first thing is making sure that you're actually talking to the right people, the right hiring managers. The second thing is making sure that you attach a personalized invite. My goodness, if I could show you all my LinkedIn connection requests, I have about 9,700.
Yeah, I have like 7,000.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you were to scroll down and look through what percentage of those people send personalized invites, you will quickly see roughly about 5% of people, maybe 10% on a good day, will send personalized invites.
Yeah.
But of those 10% or 5 people, you'll only see about half or about a third who actually sends a crafted message that sounds something similar to, hey Jerry, hey Daliana, my name is Jerry, currently a junior analyst at a hospital, looking to move my career towards the tech field, would love to chat about the role that you're hiring for. I would love to talk about XYZ. It could be projects, culture, team, something that you can't read online would be great to chat more. As long as you're being extremely direct as possible to the hiring manager, it allows for them to make a decision of whether or not they want to talk to you. If they don't reply to you, cool. That only took you 15 seconds for you to reply to or message out to them anyways. But if people accept, then you know that they have intent to talk to you, because otherwise they wouldn't have accepted.
Yeah, that's a great example. So first, it needs to be personalized. And second, it needs to be relevant. You need to look at whether someone's hiring a role that's related to your past experience and bring it up. You don't have to summarize your entire experience. People are busy. Make it short, make it easy for them to read. And then have a call to action. Hey, can we chat for 15 minutes? Or, can you send my resume to your team and see if they can, and also be thoughtful.
Yeah. And the best mentality that you should have as you're approaching hiring managers is more of, hey, I'm not quite ready to apply to your role yet because I have these pending questions that I can't find online.
Right.
If we could chat for 15 minutes, then I'll apply to your team.
Oh, I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Because then it suddenly changes the narrative from, please,
you need to win me over.
Yeah, exactly, right?
I love
That's
it.
exactly right. And so, but it's so backwards because so many people believe that they don't have value because they don't go to Harvard or they don't have Google or Amazon on their resume. But the fact of the matter is, for everyone to get Amazon or Google or Facebook for the first time on their resume, they have to have work outside of those companies.
Yeah.
Right. So that's just the biggest thing I've learned.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great tip. And what are some common mistakes when people try to network either on LinkedIn or in real life?
The biggest mistake that you have when you network is you're just networking just to network. I've seen so many people, even people from my alma mater, Babson College, who reach out to me, and you could easily tell that they're just reading questions off of a list so that they can get to the final question that says, so can I get a referral to Google? It was very obvious.
So obvious, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but the best calls are the ones that really make me think, and they really sort of ask questions to build on the conversation we're talking about. Not to say, so Jerry, tell me about a project that you worked on. Cool. So tell me about your team. Cool. I want conversation. I want curiosity, because you have to realize that every word of what you say and how you say it, the other person on the opposite end is consuming that.
Yeah.
It's just not what you say, it's how you say it. And all those play into a factor of people trying to answer two questions in their head when they're thinking about hiring someone. One, can I imagine myself working with this person? And two, can you actually do the job?
Yeah.
But I feel like most people flip the priority. People always think, can I do the job is more important than can I imagine myself working with you?
Yeah.
I think it's the other way. Like, you can teach someone R, you can teach someone SQL, but you can't teach someone to be personable or mesh with your team.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a great shift of mindset for a lot of job seekers.
That's right.
So talking about mistakes, what are some mistakes you made in your career?
Man, I made so many.
What is your favorite one?
Oh, my favorite one. I think so. The biggest mistake I've learned in my career is not asking for help. I always assumed, growing up from an Asian American household, I was always told to grind it out. You will always find a way. Just grind it out. And it's not in the Korean culture for me to ask people for help.
Yeah.
It's just a very taboo thing.
Yeah.
And that sort of was embedded into me growing up. And so that sort of spilled into my professional career. So as I was going through the early parts of my career, I'd always think to myself, nah, I'm not going to ask my manager. I'm going to just spend 10 hours. I'm not going to stop until I figure it out.
Yeah.
But in actuality, I probably could have saved 5, 10, 15 hours had I just asked someone, been like, hey, I'm kind of struggling here, would love your help.
Yeah.
And as long as you're not taking advantage of them, as long as you have good intent, as long as you have tried, that's when it's okay to ask for help, if that means that you can save time. The best way that this has been explained to me is my manager told me, think about our team. Our team, we have 5 people. Therefore, we have about 200 working hours that we can dedicate to making impact for the company. Now, if you're spending 15 hours on a simple task that someone else could have helped solve for you with 5 minutes of their time, that person has now enabled 15 hours to be used on other projects.
Yeah.
And when I thought about it like that, I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I made the same mistake.
Yeah.
And from your manager's perspective, your manager doesn't care whether you did 100%. They just want the project to be done.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. And talking about being, from a Korean family, and then we have a lot of international students just moved to the US for college or grad school. What are some mistakes they make, or what type of actions or mindset do you want them to change? Yeah,
I think the biggest mindset that we've sort of felt and heard from people from international backgrounds is that because they hear about the H-1B process, because they hear that it's a question on some applications of, hey, are you eligible to work in the United States, that they feel that their international status actually is something that they should hide. Or is something that they don't want to bring up to people.
Yeah. When
in fact, I think if you look at people who come from tech, actually there's a significant population of people who have come from international backgrounds, who have broken in. And you coming from an international background, you actually have that same commonality with every single person who has stepped through the doors of Google or the dream company that you have, and they know exactly what it's like. And because people know how hard it is for international students and job seekers to find their jobs, people are more likely to offer a lending hand because they understand and they empathize with the pains. So the biggest advice or sort of thing that I would recommend that people who come from international backgrounds really think about is, how do you use your identity as someone who grew up in another country, but now you're coming to the States to find work? How do you use that as sort of a superpower? The biggest thing that you leverage is making sure you connect with people who come from similar backgrounds as you, because you're gonna have so much in common.
Yeah, that's a great advice. So you are the COO of Wonsulting. Now you help people get jobs in tech after you figure out on your own how to network, how to get into Google. Can you tell us what motivates you to leave Google and then start company?
Yeah. I've had this conversation with someone today, actually, where people want to work at Google because they want to be working on projects that impact billions of people, millions of people, or they want to work on deals that have millions, tens of millions of impact. But to me, I feel like relative impact was something that was it was a big priority for me. And the second thing is I wanted my work to matter. So at Wonsulting, the work that I do might get us 4 or 5 figure deal. At Google, that would be nothing. But for us, that's huge because we're a startup. And so it's the fact that I have more control over the direction of the company, to me, something that I'm just super grateful for. But the biggest and most important thing is that I get to help people like myself when I was back in a freshman in college. That the success of our company is dependent on whether or not the freshman year Jerry's can actually use the advice that we share and land their jobs. One of the studies that we do internally every month is we check up on all of our clients and we see on average how long does it take for them to get a job, if they even do get a job. And those 2 key metrics, what percentage of people get jobs and how fast they can get a job, are 2 things that we think about every single day.
Wow. I can see how passionate you are when you talk about those. It must feel great when you hear those good news from your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be frank, like there's also times when people come to us and go, hey, listen, like I don't feel like I got my value. I don't feel like I got my value. But those to me are also, I'm just so grateful for, because people are so invested into their career that they have taken this chance with us, and that they haven't seen as much success. So therefore, it forces me to think, okay, cool, what could I have done better for you? Right? And so for me, even receiving news like that, to me, excites me, because I'm like, man, like this tells me that people care and that the work that we're doing actually matters, because the first half of the work that we want people to realize about the job search is that you have to want it first. And because if you don't want it, then nothing else matters. But as long as we can create that internal demand and sort of need for that person, we've at least done 50% of our job. So that's something that we also like to think about too.
And now, not just applying for a job for yourself, working with so many different people, your clients, what are some lessons you learned from them?
The biggest lesson I've learned with working with hundreds, if not thousands of clients now, is that nobody's thinking about the job search for people who come from non-traditional backgrounds. For example, LinkedIn recently reduced their number of weekly connection limits or connection requests to 100 a week. And their whole reasoning is that, oh, you should connect with people that you actually know. That's fine for people who actually have people that they know, right? But for people...
That's the whole point. I want to connect with people. I don't know anybody.
That's exactly right. But for people who come from people like my background, right? Like, how do you connect with people when you don't have anyone to connect, right? So I feel like that is just the biggest thing. It's just like making sure that we're just focused on solving the right problems. And of course, making sure that we are there for the underdogs. We are there for people who come from those non-traditional backgrounds and being that voice. There are so many job-specific problems that these people face in our community that no company is really incentivized to tackle, because they're saying, well, I'd rather tackle the people who are going to actively use my platform, who already have experience in the job search field. We're the complete opposite of that. We tackle the people who have never heard about the job search process before.
Yeah. So do you have a data point that a customer you work with that he or she come from a very kind of challenging background and got a job that you're most proud of?
Yeah. The one that stands out to me was this one person who had a PhD in education. And this person came to us and said, listen, I want to pivot my career so that I can be a UX researcher.
Oh, okay.
It's like, wow, that's a pretty tough switch.
Yeah.
But about 4 or 5 months later, he got a UX researcher role at AT&T.
Wow.
Crazy. So how we sort of thought about that was this person from a PhD background, what they did was they assumed that, oh, because I'm from a PhD in education, my skill set's probably only valuable for the education space. But the way that we think about the job search is you actually have two things in any role, no matter if you're in school, you're learning, or you're working. You have functional skills, aka the actual skills that you use on a day-to-day, research, analytics, things like that. And you have the domain knowledge or industry knowledge of like being in the education space. So for this specific client, we told them, listen, you cannot tell people that you are a PhD in education, that all you're focusing on education. Rather, you should say, I'm an analyst by trade, and the sort of work that I'm doing I'm a researcher by trade. The way that I've even applied that is through my PhD program. Because when you suddenly change a narrative from I'm a PhD in education, but rather you go, I'm a researcher who's focusing his skills on the education space. Now I want to tackle these type of problems. Now the transition makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
So that's one of my most proud sort of client I always sort of think about, because it just was something that you never think about, right? Like the exit opportunities as a PhD in education typically is not tech.
Right.
But somehow, some way he did it.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. And I can see how you use your skill set as a strategy operations manager in Google to help your client come out with a strategy. Essentially the same thing, right? Break down a big challenge into small steps and tackle that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And even just a job search process, if there's one thing that I wish I could incorporate to everyone's mind about the job search, is to focus truly on where the problem is. Most people believe that, oh, I didn't get this job, I have to go back to my resume. Your resume could be completely fine. You might be applying to the wrong type of jobs. You might be applying to the jobs at the wrong time. That maybe these jobs already have 10, 15 people in their interviewing pipeline, but by the time you hit the recruiter screen, they already have 3 offers that were given out. And if that's the case, then you getting rejected actually had nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with your resume or interviewing. It just simply was just a matter of time.
Yeah.
So focusing really on the variables that matter in the job search, so important, and it's something I talk about for literally days.
Yeah. So now with COVID, the whole job market dynamic changed, and
That's
also people are doing a lot of virtual rounds. What are some advice for people who are interviewing, or say especially got laid off and then interviewing during COVID?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing there is recruiters and hiring managers are empathetic to the situation of what happened last year. That when companies were furloughing employees, when they were letting people go, that these are all factors that were outside of the job seekers' control. And some job seekers were extremely prepared. They knew exactly what to do. They got a job that month.
Yeah.
But there's also a large population of people who actually didn't recover. And just knowing that, one, if this ever happens to you, that it's okay. It's not your fault. And that everything is within your control to find your next role. And for the second type of people who maybe have been laid off, not recently, and it's been a while, making sure that you are still building the skills, even if it's not through your work. Maybe it's through a free online course. And then maybe after you take that course, maybe you play around with some Kaggle data. All that is fair game because you want to make sure that you're still developing those skills, but of course, making sure you focus on the part of the job search where it truly is a problem area for you as a job seeker.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so when I get a job, I got an offer, I'm going to negotiate a salary.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. What are some mistakes people make in salary negotiation?
Yes. So the first thing is, I like to call this actually compensation negotiation.
Compensation.
Because so much of what compensation is you have bonus, equity, benefits, things like that. My friend even negotiated a standing desk in her offer, which is the funniest thing. The biggest mistakes that people make in compensation negotiation is that they don't make it fact-based. And they don't make it fact-based. And the second thing is that they're asking for more. The mindset that you should have as you're sort of going about compensation negotiation is about fair. You don't want to be paid significantly more than the market rate. You want to be paid at a fair market rate. Because when you sort of think about that, then that sort of normalizes everything and says, cool, well, all I need to know is what I have this offer here at what, let's say $70,000 in total compensation. I need to see whether or not this is in higher or lower than my expectation of a baseline. For you to find what the baseline is, you just need to do research on what total compensation looks like for your role in that location with your similar numbers of years of experience. The best way to do this would be go onto sites like linkedin.com/salary, levels.fyi, indeed.com. All these websites have sort of salary tools that you can use to determine whether or not your pay is there. Then making sure that you go into the recruiter negotiation as collaborative, as feeling like, hey, listen, I'm just trying to figure out this gap for myself. Would love to just chat about it. I think one of the things that you shouldn't do in a negotiation is come off as, why did you give me lower pay? Like that is not wrong. That is so wrong. But rather just saying, hey, listen, I'm just trying to figure out this gap. Help me understand. What can we do?
Yeah. That's a great tip. And also, I like the website you recommend. Definitely check it out and then find more data point and use that in your negotiation.
That's right.
So you have over 130K followers on LinkedIn. How do you find building an audience on LinkedIn help you with finding career opportunities? And do you think everyone else should try to build audience on LinkedIn?
Yeah, it absolutely helps. You know, funny enough, when I was interviewing last year, my last recruiting round, I interviewed with about 10 companies. And 2 of those opportunities actually came because I was active on LinkedIn.
Wow.
And the people who I interviewed with actually saw my content on LinkedIn. The reason why that's so important is because you have to think back to what recruiters and hiring managers are looking for. What are the 2 questions they're thinking about when they're assessing you? Can you do the job, which comes from your resume and interviews? But most importantly, can I imagine myself working with you?
Yeah.
If the hiring manager or recruiter has this, I can feel who you are as a person through your content, already that lowers the barrier of entry for you because you now have less to show. All you can be is just who you are because that's exactly the type of content you should be posting. So it makes interviewing significantly better. It eases the barrier to enter to apply for jobs because you sort of have people in all these companies who sort of follow your content. And then if they ever have opportunities, they'll reach out to you and say, hey, listen, we'd love to chat about getting you into our firm.
Yeah.
So absolutely helps. LinkedIn content creation, no matter how big or small you are, it absolutely helps.
Yeah. And what are some tips to build audience on LinkedIn?
Consistency. I know we talked about this a while ago. But growing on LinkedIn, same with growing a muscle or flexing a skill. Consistency. It doesn't matter whether or not you have bad content or good content plan. Just if you haven't posted today, try something today. Because if it's bad, you always have tomorrow. And that's some of the biggest thing I've learned about content creation across all the platforms: TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Quora now. Being consistent is the best thing that you can do for your content because you'll learn you'll get better, you'll mess up, but you'll sort of see this exponential curve of just learning.
Yeah. And a lot of people tell me, oh, I'm so worried about sharing my stories. What do you want to tell them?
Yeah. Your first 3 will feel very awkward. Absolutely, it's going to make you feel very awkward. But after the 3rd one, I guarantee those feelings are going to start going down. I remember I felt so awkward exposing myself a little bit because I would share very personal details about sort of my upbringing, my career, and my journey so far, the good, and also a lot actually on the bad. And so I remember I had a post once, and the managing director that I was working with, he would always make little comments and say, here's the influencer coming in. But I think once people began to see how serious it is and how you want to use your platform as a microphone for you to help inspire others, people actually start taking that in a really good, positive way. And really, if anything, makes them feel like, wow, like there's so much I can learn from this person about content creation. So for me, my career, it's definitely made me stand out. For mostly for good. I'm sure there are some people who are like, who is this guy? But it also, I feel like, has led me to so many opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten.
Yeah.
Like being on this podcast.
And I know you also been featured on all those Business Insider, Forbes. Are those opportunities coming from LinkedIn?
Yeah, surprisingly, they do. Some absolutely do. We've gotten a ton from TikTok. We've gotten some from Instagram. We've definitely gotten some from LinkedIn. And the overarching theme about all these sort of PR features is that people want to share stories, right? And the more that you can create your content to be more story driven, to share something about yourself or a learning that you've had in a way that's your voice, the better that you'll see people sort of stick and resonate with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, despite you sort of like Newsweek, Business Insider, Forbes, and all of them, I'm not anyone special. Like I really am not. Like if an average guy like me can do it, like so can anyone else. Yeah.
So I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't have any stories. I'm just a nerd. I'm just a student. My life, I don't have any drama." How do you help them find their story?
Yeah, I would say I would ask them 2 questions. 1, is your life perfect? And if the answer is yes, then I'll say, how do I get there?
That's great.
But if their answer is no, which most people typically do run into problems in their career and their lives, the question is, why don't you share that? And oftentimes the pushback I hear is, that's just too personal, or hey, I just feel I'm not comfortable. My boss might see it. To be honest, like I sort of look at content creation as sort of like a personal journal to me. And the biggest value that I see with creating content and putting everything out there online is that someone out there, I guarantee you, is going to go through that similar pain or is currently going through that similar pain. And by you taking the courage to click submit after you create that post, and if that post can inspire someone to take a different action, or if that can help that person get out of a mental state that they sort of felt like they were stuck, that's the whole point and journey of sort of LinkedIn content creation.
Yeah. I think for everyone who's worried about not having a story, you always have something, a job, the first time you do it, the last time you do it, or the most weird, most interesting experience you had. Just write about it. I'm sure you have some story you like to share with your family, with your friends. Be creative. And also, like Jerry said, first time you write it, nobody read it, and you can always either read and post again. The good thing about it, people also forget about it.
That's right. Hey, we can't talk about the posting.
Yep. And okay, we talk about your career journey, and I'm curious, so who is Jerry Lee when he was a kid or a teenager?
Man, no one's ever asked me that. For me as a teenager, I had a core group of friends in high school, and I was a crazy extrovert. I always wanted to be around people all times during the day. And so after school, what we would do was my friend group and I, we would always go to the park. We might go to play tennis. We might go to the library. We might go eat somewhere. every day up until 8 or 9 p.m., go home, sleep, do the exact same thing over again.
Yeah.
So for me, I've always had good, supportive community in my life, thankfully. Wow. And I never wanted to be away from them. Mm-hmm. So that was me in high school and as a teenager.
Yeah. And when you were in high school, who did you want to become?
Who did I want to become? To be honest, I wanted to just have, the traditional American dream. I wanted to have a stable job. I wanted to have a white picket fence, 2 kids, stable life. Mm-hmm. And that was my ambition. And sort of knowing what I know now, I absolutely want stability in my life. But the most important driving factor for me is I want to help people. Yeah. That I feel like I have been put on this earth for me to use the life learnings that I've had and story and experiences that I'm going through to help people get out of in situations where they feel like they're also struggling. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, knowing what you know today, if you can talk to the high school Jerry, what would you tell him?
I'd say, stop being so mean to mom and dad.
I think everybody needs to hear that.
Yeah. I'd say be nicer to mom and dad. Yeah. But in all seriousness, I would say the biggest thing I would tell myself is, man,
it was perfect. You don't need to tell him anything.
I'm like, there's so many things. I would say if there's one thing, I would just say, just know that it's all going to be okay. Yeah. I remember going through high school and college and being really stressed that, hey, listen, like, I don't have a fallback plan. I have to make this work. Things have to work out. Otherwise, my family doesn't have a backup plan. Yeah. And I worried a lot about that going through high school. And oftentimes in high school, I felt really helpless because at the time I couldn't work. And even if I did want it to work, I didn't have the time because I was taking so many classes. Yeah. And I always felt like every time I saw my parents struggle financially, it made me feel so useless. Yeah. And so if there's one thing that I wish I could tell myself, just keep your head down, keep pushing forward, keep meeting new people, be the extrovert that you are, and things are going to be okay. And had I known that, I probably would have been less stressed.
I know, but if you felt things would be okay, maybe you're not as motivated as you were today.
That's 100% true. Maybe things would have been turned out differently.
Yeah, it's hard to find that balance. Mm-hmm. So right now, things are better. I'm sure as an entrepreneur, there's still some stressful situation. I can see you're a very optimistic person. So how do you handle stress now?
Yeah, if there's one thing that Google has taught me is that everything is solvable. That is the one thing, no matter what, it might be a very bad solution, but it can be solved with a very bad solution. Yeah. So to me, I just feel like, sorry, what was the question again?
How do you handle stress? But I feel like you're going in a good direction. Everything is solvable out here to...
Exactly. And when you have that mentality that everything can be solved, things no longer become...
stressful.
As stressful. There are definitely times I'm like, I gotta do this. I gotta work late today. There's so many things I have to do for sure. But for me, because I had this unwavering self-conviction that almost anything in life is solvable, that it sort of makes me feel like I feel stressed now, but I'm gonna get over it. Yeah. And I think part of that to me, I feel like was instilled by my parents because growing up, I grew up low income, first gen. We were on food stamps growing up. And I just remember that every single day, my dad would come home and he would always bring a smile on his face. No matter how tough things were, no matter how many times I overheard my parents talking at 12 a.m., thinking if we should move back to Korea, he always had this positive, upbeat attitude that everything was going to be okay. Yeah. And so I always think back to those moments because I'm like, I'm here stressing about, man, I have so much work to do that can help unlock incremental revenue for our business. But back then, my parents were struggling about whether or not we could even survive here. Yeah. So to me, I feel like my experiences growing up, definitely I wanted to hide that growing up. But now I'm very proud talking about it because all those experiences had led me to be the person I am today with the mentality that I have today. Yeah. So everything's solvable.
Yeah. Well, I think, the type of attitude, the positivity our parents influence are is like the best education.
My gosh, that is everything. And that's one thing that I wish that I could instill to my future kids is like having that same level of conviction, positivity, and just knowing that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So I'll probably have to bug my parents for that.
Yeah. So obviously you're a expert in job search. What do you think is going to be the future of job searching?
The future of job search is that there will be no job search. I truly believe that eventually we're going to be at a place where LinkedIn, another platform, is going to allow for you to upload all your experiences in your resumes.
Wow.
Companies will have such good models that they'll be able to say the kind of person culturally we want is XYZ. The type of experiences that we want are ABC. That you're not going to have to go through applying online and such, that there will eventually be a universal matchmaking system that'll allow for you to get interviews. I feel like today there's so much that AI has done for us in so many parts of our lives. Recruiting is one of the spaces where I feel like it hasn't really been penetrated enough.
Yeah.
But I feel like at the pace that we're going, there will be no more job applications. There will only be interviews, I think.
Wow, that's very exciting.
Yeah, I really believe this. I mean, we think back 5 years ago, and most of the companies' recruiting channels have been in-person events.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple online with using digital ads. But now LinkedIn is, as well as TikTok resumes, they're sort of approaching this direction of, well, what if recruiters can proactively reach out to candidates?
Yeah.
What if there were a way for me to sort of use filters and say, this is the kind of candidate I want? Cool. Now there's 35 people. Let me reach out to these 35 people. I'd have to believe that that isn't the ideal state, that is not the perfect way. The perfect way for would be that you as a job seeker would get perfectly connected to the opportunities you want, and the companies themselves would be able to find the right type of people for the job that they want to hire for.
Wow, I love that vision. And for candidates today or people who already have a job to prepare for the future, what type of new skills you think we need to start developing?
I think personal branding absolutely is going to be a factor in this future of recruiting. Absolutely. Because the biggest thing that interviewing is looking for is, yes, to make sure that you can actually do the job. But I think if you look at a resume and you believe that the person is honest, you can pretty much get 60% of confidence that whether or not someone can actually do the job by looking at their resume. But by looking at someone's resume, there's a 0% chance that you can actually know who that person is and see whether or not they're a culture fit for your team. So by building your personal brand today, start today, you'll eventually start giving the world the data of who you are as a professional and as a person. The more data that you sort of put on there, I truly believe that in the future of work, that everyone's going to have some level of personal brand, and that's going to be used to help develop features for models to help predict whether or not my team can work with someone like you.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think being able to build personal brand online is actually great for people who are introverts, who are not comfortable with in-person network events.
That's exactly
because
right.
You don't have to do all the small talks, warm and fuzzy. You can just write a technical blog, right? You don't have to be like me and Jerry writing our stories, sharing our journeys on LinkedIn. You can write on Medium. You can publish your work on GitHub, or you can use those public data sets to do some analysis or share your opinions on some events. So there are a lot of ways for you to build a personal brand today.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
So before we wrap up, what are something very exciting you're working on right now you want to share with us?
Ooh. I don't know if I can share this, but
now I'm more curious. Can you give us a hint?
Yeah. So one of the things that we're working on a ton is we want to help enable more actual influencers to focus more on careers.
Yeah.
We're sort of working on a program to help aspiring content creators for them to break into the the world of content creation and provide them with opportunities. It's something that very in the early stages, but we really want to sort of nail it. And the second thing is that we're working on something to make the job search process easy. That is as easy as a click of a button. And so we'll have a lot more details in the coming months, but if you're a software engineer, please reach out to us.
So for people who now want to work with you or your co-founder at Wonsulting, how do they find you guys? How do they apply?
Yeah, the best way that you can find Wonsulting, the work that we do, the jobs that we're hiring for, is really to follow our social media. Wonsulting on Instagram will probably be the best way for you to stay in contact with sort of what we're working on, what we're doing, what opportunities we have. But if there's one tip that I'd give, not only to applying to a small company like ours, but also to any other company, would be to show your excitement by putting together 1 or 2 slides of what are some of the problems that you'd be excited to work about and why. One of the biggest things that we look for, and almost everyone that we hire on our team has always put together something like that because they have been following Wonsulting for a while.
Yeah.
Us as a startup, we can't take risks and hire people who don't really know about Wonsulting's brand, because we have to make sure that this stuff is exciting to you and that you have been following us for a while, because we're just so risk adverse as a startup. So in a similar sense, no matter what company you all apply to, no matter what opportunity you're looking at, the more proactive you can be, the more you are willing to stand out, like putting together a 2-page proposal of these are some of the problems I'm really interested in working on. That's how you go above and beyond. And that's almost every one of our team members have done that.
Yeah. And for people who want to join as a client or just learn more tricks, where do they find you on social media?
Yeah. So you could find us at wonsulting.com. If there's anything that you liked about me talking about job search strategies, we have services and online courses to sort of help with this. The second place that you can find me specifically is you can look up Jerry Lee Wonsulting on LinkedIn, or you can look up Jerry J.H. Lee on TikTok and Instagram. And I always post there every day.
Yeah, I love your Instagram reels.
Yeah, that's right.
They're both funny and informative. I love those. Well, it's great to have you today, Jerry. I learned so much from you, and thank you so much for sharing those career tips with us. I'm so excited to see the next steps of you and Wonsulting. Yeah,
of course. Thank you so much for having me, Daliana. For everyone out there who's still on the job hunt, just know that you are going to make it, that this is going to work out. The fact that you have spent over an hour hearing some random guy talk about his career and share some of the strategies that he's learned means and tells us that you're going to be okay. So go out there and get that job.
Yay!